So what I'm trying to illustrate to you as council members is just the trajectory that the college finds itself on. Let's look at the operational projections that have been prepared by your management team over the next 3 fiscal years, including that of the fiscal 25, which we find ourselves in right now. As you'll note, they have operationally an excess of expenses over revenues, 528,000. You can see the trend as you move along. There's the purchase of capital and intangible assets, and there's also the execution of various capital and strategic projects that have been defined. But what you will note is that each year, cumulatively then, the college is spending more than it is earning. In other words, its expenses are outpacing its revenues at this point in time. And that obviously is not a self-sustaining financial model for any organization. So let me put it in perspective for you where we are now. With reference to the 2024 audited financial statements, which were presented earlier, in total, the college at the end of December 31st, 2024, had $2.6 million, roughly speaking, in cash and investments. We acknowledge the fact that there are payables outstanding for various matters existing at year end, and we also acknowledge that the college collects fees from members in advance of rendering services and has a duty then to render those services to the registrants. That being said, the quantum of that is equal to arguably half of what you consider to be your expenses each year. So what we see then at the end of 24 is cash and investments to service liabilities of close to $3.8 million and a cash and investment deficiency. This cash and investment deficiency only expands itself as you move along by reference to the fact that each year you're going to be operating in an operational deficiency. So you can see the trend that's happening here with the cumulative deficit. It really, as I say, is not self-sustaining in any manner. So the question is, what does the college do? The first response typically is that of cost cutting. And I believe management has revised projections since we last discussed this topic. They've sharpened the pencil, you would say. But again, you are a self-regulatory organization, and there's only so much cost cutting that can be done to still provide what is in the public interest, the services that the college needs to do. Therefore, the only other real aspect that the college has is to consider is that of raising registration fees. It is the primary revenue generator. So again, if your expenses have been cut to what you think is appropriate relative to your regulatory self-regulation and delivery, and you then have to look at, as I say, increasing revenues. So that really is the point that we find ourselves at right now. And I would ask council, are there any questions relative to just the macroeconomic environment of the college, the trajectory it's on, the fact that this is not a self-sustaining model to spend more than you earn year after year, and quite frankly, the only response to it is to increase registration fees. Again, how to increase those fees, the quantum, and how to deliver that is the next subject. But again, just from a macro perspective, any questions of council relative to the premise that it's inevitable at this point in time, registration fees need to be increased. The revised fee model that is brought forward to you today from your Finance and Audit Committee relative to the January 30th resolution. This column represents what was initially proposed, a fee increase one time of $173. The Finance and Audit Committee is bringing forward today to Council a revised fee model that provides for a staggered approach to increasing the fees over a number of years. Well, let's chat about what initially occurred and what impact this change has to you as a college. There were initially 4 criteria defined by the Finance and Audit Committee relative to the increase in registration fees, all of which I thought were prudent from a financial perspective. The first was that there would be no further annual deficits. So that means that in the future, no year would experience expenses being greater than revenues. And you can see here that under this model, that was accomplished in year 1, which was initially anticipated to be 2025, there would have been profits, a net income generated by the college. The new model accomplishes that now in 2026. The second criteria that was defined initially was that the college would have no cumulative deficits. You will note that we've discussed the cumulative deficit that's presented on your financial statements at December 31st, 24. You will see under the new model that this now is accomplished in the year 2027, whereas previously it was accomplished in 2025. The third criteria that was defined was that there would be no variability in fees. It would be a constant. But the college has looked at this matter and suggested now that the variability perhaps is appropriate, and you will see then that there are increases each and every year in the fees themselves. And finally, what I would consider to be most important from a council perspective is the financial stability of the college. What we were really trying to achieve through this project and through the direction of the Finance and Audit Committee was the stability long-term of the college from a financial perspective. And that was defined as achieving, let's call it a reserve, savings, but in the word of accountants, unrestricted net assets equal to 4.5 months of your annual expenses, which is certainly a benchmark that many other colleges in Ontario utilize. And it's also one that's consistent with Canada Revenue Agency relative to your not-for-profit status. You will see previously that 4.5 months was being achieved in 2028. It is now being achieved in 2029. So let's go back then to the basic premise of what the fee looked like. Initially, as you can see, it was a flat $173 for this current year, and it would have then remained constant for a number of years. Relative to stakeholder communication, the thoughts of the Finance and Audit Committee, the management team, it's now suggested that a staggered approach be taken. In year one, the fee would increase from $470 to $545, representing a $75 increase. In year two, a further $70 to $615. In year three, a further $28 to $643 in total. Thereafter, the current bylaws, as drafted for approval, suggest that a cost of living inflation increase would be appropriate each and every year. That I deem reasonable, certainly in light of the college itself is going to experience inflationary pressures. So we see then thereafter that this increase is relatively smaller, as would be expected, because now we've arrived at the figure that we believe is appropriate to achieve that 4.5 month savings reserve for this college. And now you move on a COLA thereafter. So that then is what the Finance and Audit Committee, after looking at a number of different models, upwards of perhaps 8 to 10 different models with us, has decided that it was appropriate to bring forward to you today for your consideration and approval. I would suggest that's what I wanted to share with the council today in terms of the proposed and revised fee model.